listen long enough to you, I'd find a way to believe it's all true. And knowing that you lied straight face while I cried, still I look to find a reason to believe someone like you makes it hard to live without somebody else. Someone like you makes it easy to give, never thinking of myself. If I gave you time to change my mind, I'd find a way to leave the past behind. And knowing that you lied straight face while I cried, still I look to find a reason to believe someone like you makes it hard to live without somebody else. Someone like you makes it easy to give, never thinking of myself. If I listen long enough to you, find a way to believe it's all true. Knowing that you lied straight face while I cried, still I look to find a reason to believe. Yes, I look to find a reason to believe. Yes, I look to find a reason. Yes, I look to find a reason to believe.
Richard Hastings started his musical journey playing guitar at age 7 and has been a professional working musician as a guitarist and vocalist his entire life as a performer, studio musician, composer, educator, music contractor, and recording artist. Although his styles include classical, jazz, pop, country, and flamenco, his passion has always been songwriting. Inspired as a young man by his older cousin Tim Hardin, the writer of If I Were a Carpenter, Reason to Believe, and many more, Richard has returned to his songwriting roots with 2 new CDs, Another Life, Fate Cuts Like a Knife, and Last Troubadour, The Tim Hardin Legacy.
Welcome to the Better Each Day podcast radio show with Bruce Hilliard. Today and every day, reaching out for innovative ideas in every way. Today's show is brought to you by your future. It comes with a lifetime guarantee. Make a better each day now, baby. Better in every way. All right, so yeah, you were asking about my story, how I, my musician's journey here, and I've pretty much come full circle in my life. As I said, as a young kid, I was always into music, and I watched my cousin Tim Hardin in the early days, and he always inspired me as a songwriter, and I used to go see him at the Troubadour and stuff. I mean, I was so young, my mom would take me down there, and
it was really something to see him. And Tim wrote such great songs as "If I Were a Carpenter" and "Reason to Believe" and "Misty Roses," a lot of great tunes. So I was always inspired as a songwriter, but as time went on, I started studying music in college and just became fascinated with every aspect of it, meaning everything from class. I studied classical guitar. In fact, that was my first degree. And later on continued studying jazz. And as a professional, I've been playing classical, pop, jazz, folk, country, just about everything except rock and roll for all these years, just working as a professional guy here in the Southern California area.
That's a good thing to be able to draw from a songwriter's standpoint, though. You've got an arsenal of things you can work with.
Absolutely. And the best thing, though, when I'm writing is that I forget all that stuff.
Yeah, that's good, too.
Yeah, because sometimes it's just good to just be intuitive and write what makes sense to you. You're right, absolutely. Just having the ability to understand what's going on harmonically, what's going on technically, and then, of course, recording. I do all the guitar parts and everything. But it's kind of come full circle because out of necessity and my musical journey, I just really enjoyed studying all these different types of music and performing them all my life. But, by a series of events in the last, 5 or 6 years, I really came back to my original passion. And it came about in kind of a funny way. I was with this wonderful lady, Carol, and in the beginning of our relationship, we used to always come back to her place, and she had this compilation of tunes from the 60s, and one of them was Tim Hardin singing "Reason to Believe." And it came on every time when I came over, and I kept saying, "Oh, that's my cousin Tim," She'd go, "Yeah, right." Mm-hmm. And after a while, because she didn't know Tim's music, after a while she just said she researched Tim, and then she just fell in love with him. And then she, most of the gigs she'd heard me on, I'd been playing my instrumental stuff, my jazz or my flamenco or this kind of stuff. And then she heard me on one of my gigs where I'm singing, and she goes, "Richard, why aren't you doing that?" She goes, you need to write get back to your writing, and you need to make a CD of Tim Hardin's music, And it was just sort of an epiphany, and she really inspired me to do that. So that was our focus for a couple of years. And I believe I told you the irony and the tragedy of it was that Carol passed away during that time.
Yeah.
And many of the songs on this new release are with her, for her, about her, and about that whole process. So ironically, this whole thing turned into almost a prophetic. Some of the songs became prophetic, and of course, it just a way of me getting through that and expressing my grief and all that. So, if I can gather myself together, it's all this stuff that I've written on this last one are very personal and deeply felt tunes.
Yeah, I was looking and listening, and I was like, what one should we talk about? Because they all seem to be, exactly what you just described. Very coming from your heart, I guess, is what I want to say. Yeah,
and like I say, I kind of took that page from Tim in a sense that, like on Tim's, I'll get back to Tim's story in a bit. I know that a lot of people know his name, and a lot of people don't these days. But, on his gravestone, it says, he sang from the heart. So, point being is, that's where I really wanted to come from on this album. And I'll just give you an example. It was so prophetic and so strange that the one tune on there, which actually Carol and I came up with the title together because it was just such a simple thought that really women and men want to hear, and it's called "Tell Her." And I think you've heard that on the CD. And,
I did.
And I wrote that while she was alive, and she loved that tune. But the original chorus or bridge, whatever you would call it, was kind of vague. And I'd gone back to Nashville and thrown my songs around to some writers back there, and that was one of the suggestions. And this was while Carol was alive. We went back there together, and one of the guys said, that bridge is great, but it's too big. You got to personalize it. So as the bridge goes now, it's, I speak from the heart because I let her slip away, only to find it's too late to tell her. Well, at that time, I didn't know she'd be gone.
Yeah.
And so the song became strangely prophetic, and yet it makes more sense, from a craft point of view as well. I mean, I speak from my heart here, but I'm also very aware of the craft and what a person is expressing in a song. I mean, there's certain things that personalize it, certain things that make it something that everyone can relate to. And so I think that if you listen to the words of that song, I think it says it all in that regard and tells that story.
If you see waves when you kiss her, she stirs the waters of your heart when she walks in the room. She makes you feel like a river flowing back to its source. Tell her. If every love song you hear is about her, like an epic on a silver screen, no story ends without her. A love scene. If you've been wondering where she's been all your life, like a long forgotten memory from another place and time, like a long lost twin you lost so long ago you thought you'd never find. Tell her. You know I speak from the heart because I let her slip away, only to find it's too late to tell her. And when you feel like you're so far from home, like a lonely traveler in a tale of woe, 'cause your story ends without her. Remember, that when the shadows were closing in on you, she was the only ray of light shining through, like an angel of mercy taking you through the darkest night. You love her. You know I speak from the heart because I let her slip away, only to find it's too late to tell her. Tell her.
So that was just sort of an overall reflection of my life and life in general, and I'm old enough to be able to look back a little bit and see all that, and I'm fascinated by the concept.
Yeah, those things happen fast in life too, There's things that you work for your entire life that just take forever, and some of those crazy things as a result of fate. Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny how that works.
So you've been playing a long, long time. I think you said you started when you're 7.
Yeah.
Yeah. Somebody came over with a baritone ukulele when I was about that age, and I thought that's
funny.
That's pretty.
Yeah, so it was with me as well. Somebody handed a ukulele into my hand one day, and that was it, man. 7 years old.
Yeah. Yeah. When people say they want to learn guitar, but you hear this, I can't read music, and you hear, well, it makes my fingers hurt, and this and that, and I always say, just get a ukulele, and if you get a baritone ukulele, it's tuned like the 4 high strings on a guitar, so you're already learning some of the chords exactly the way they played it guitar.
That's interesting. We have the same background, and it's it was funny because I often joke about my first experience with music, and my family and I were down at the beach here in California, like we did every year, and just having fun. I'm 7 years old. I'm this little kid, and these 2 beautiful college girls were staying next door at the the duplex there, and they thought little Dickie was cute, so they had a ukulele, and they handed me a ukulele and taught me how to sing 26 Miles Across the Sea. And so here I am getting all this attention from 2 beautiful college girls in bikinis. I don't know if there's a connection there or what, but I haven't stopped playing music since.
Oh yeah, there seems to be some sort of attraction to it too. I don't know, from women. I don't know.
Yeah, I think all that attention. I go, hey man, this is a good thing. And I remember my dad telling me when I was in college, and my dad goes, well, so you studying music in college? And I go, yeah, I want to do this. And he goes, yeah, but you'll be out late. There'll be a lot of booze and drugs and wild women and what's that? And I go, yeah.
Yeah, that age, yeah. Count me in. Yeah, baby.
But no, I'm being facetious. I've led a pretty straight life, raised 2 kids in the suburbs. But back to what we're talking about, I've just been a working guy. In Southern California, I have a company where I contract music for corporate events, which is lucrative. And then I perform. I do most of the performing for those. And I do a lot of recording, session work, and just a lot of live. I just love going out every night and playing. I do a lot of work at a lot of 5-star resorts and that kind of thing, and some clubs. And I'm happy as a clam just playing every night still. That's
a cool gig to have. You're doing a lot of different things, though. It sounds like you somewhat have a portfolio of things that you do that are interrelated.
It's just fluky. I don't know how I think it's just luck of the draw. And being in Southern California, there's enough work so that I can make a decent living and, support my habit. So as long as they keep hiring me, I'll keep doing it. In the meantime, like I said, I've kind of retooled a little bit and focusing more on songwriting.
They're great songs.
Well, I appreciate that. I'm very proud of this project.
Yeah, the melodies are great. Music is a spectrum of things. I mean, you should be able to do a whole lot of different things within for instance, you use a lot of different guitars and a lot of different guitar techniques. And as you say,
absolutely.
Yeah, you kind of forget about it and just express yourself musically. Somebody told me early on when I was studying music in college, it's like you learn all the scales and then forget them. Otherwise, you're just going to sound like you're playing scales.
Yeah, I think that was Charlie Parker who used to say that, learn everything you can, and then when you're playing, forget it.
Yeah, I know it wasn't original. I don't know who said it first, but it's good advice. Tim Hardin, that's your first cousin. How does that relationship come about?
Well, my mother's who's still alive in her 90s. She has a brother who's passed away who was Tim's father. And her brother was 10 years older than her. So Tim was kind of a generation up. But like I say, I'm this kid, and he's back in New York in Greenwich Village in the 60s and hanging out with the likes of, Joan Baez and Steve Stills and Richie Havens and the whole gang back there. And I'm just, loving it. And, we're coming home from school one day in the car, and we hear If I Were a Carpenter on the radio. And my mom goes, is that Tim? And I go, sure sounds like him. Well, it was Bobby Darin, and who admittedly kind of ripped off Tim's arrangement and vocal approach to that tune. And so, he was my big inspiration to watch Tim come up. And, we used to, they lived up in, your part of the world, they're from the Northwest, and Tim was raised in Eugene, Oregon. I was raised in Southern California, so we didn't hang a lot as kids. But they used to come down for, their summer vacations down here, and so I knew him as a kid, but I actually got to know him a little more in the last few years of his life when he was back in L.A. And I mean, this would take 2 hours to tell Tim's story, but the long and short of it is Tim, unabashedly suffered from a heroin addiction pretty much his whole adult life. And it's a product of the 60s, but he never apologized for it. In fact, he said he loves heroin.
Wow.
But I will say in his mid-30s, late 30s, he did come back to LA, and he'd been through a lot. He was living in England for years on the methadone program and had a real dark time. And obviously it was becoming a serious issue, a serious problem. And, after such success in the 60s, playing at Woodstock and everything. And then he came back to L.A. Back in, I think, about 77, and was working with a producer here to do a new CD. I guess it was an album back then, and which was half finished when he died. It was called Unforgiven. And literally living in a small apartment in Hollywood, and I got to know him more then, and he was clean, and we had a friendly relationship, and he was starting over, and he had a girlfriend there he was living with then, Janet, and they were just keeping clean and straight and moving towards doing a new CD, and then she was out of town one weekend, and I guess he'd gotten some money from the record company, and make a long story short, he took some heroin again, and I believe it was bad heroin. That's the story.
Yeah.
And he died in that little apartment in Hollywood in 1980. In fact, I think it was, if I'm not mistaken, it was like the last day of 1980 at 38 years old.
Wow.
So, and he was kind of down and out. He was kind of broke. And I will tell you, If I Were a Carpenter at the time was recorded by more people than any tune of that day. I mean, the list goes on from Johnny Cash to Dolly Parton to Bob Seger, Robert Plant. Of course, Bobby Darin had the big hit. Joan Baez. I think virtually everybody recorded that tune.
I've been playing it, and I'm a nobody, but I've been playing it for probably 25, 30 years, right? And really didn't know who wrote it, I have to admit.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I did. I just thought it was a great song, and I play it, and people say, I love that song.
Well, I just tuned it for another song that I'm about to play for you. It's called If I Were a Carpenter. If I were a carpenter and you were a lady, would you marry me anyway? Would you have my baby? And if a tinker were my trade, would you still find me carrying the pots I made, following behind me? And if I work my hands in wood, would you still love me?
And it's one of those, God, I wish I wrote that type songs,
Yeah.
It's hard to be that
what's
simple.
interesting, when Tim came, Tim was a natural musician. His parents were both musicians. His father was a acoustic bass player, jazz player, and his mother was a violist in symphony up there in Oregon. And so they came from a very musical family. when he went back to New York and ended up at Greenwich Village, he originally went back there on an acting scholarship, and he didn't even play guitar. I think he grew up playing a little piano and trombone. And he gets back to Greenwich Village, and I guess he just bought a guitar at a pawn shop and learned enough, like we're talking about. He didn't have a college degree in music or anything. He just learned enough to write some simple tunes, and that's one of the beauties of If I Were Carpenter. It's very guitaristic, as you know. He's got that drop D and just playing a little descending bass line, and then wrote some poignant lyrics over that. Says it all.
If I were a carpenter and you were a lady, would you marry me anyway? Would you have my baby? If I were a miller at a mill wheel grinding, would you miss your colored blouse, your soft shoes shining? Save my love for loneliness, save my love for sorrow. I've given you my loneliness. Give me your tomorrow. I've given you my loneliness. Give me your tomorrow.
What a great song. Back to Woodstock. He was supposed to open for the whole show. Is that correct?
That's what I have read, and that's what I heard. Not necessarily from him. I'm not sure we ever talked about Woodstock, but it's funny because
Richie Havens ended up doing it, I believe.
Yeah. Apparently, the story goes, and I've heard this from a couple of sources. The story goes that Tim was supposed to go on first because it was such chaos at Woodstock.
Yeah.
That, they're barely getting the stage up, right? So they just needed some guy who was self-contained to go up there with a guitar and play, right? They couldn't set up a band. They're running late. Everything's crazy. Well, I guess Tim was a little too loaded that day. This is the story. I'm not putting him down. I'm just saying, or he was also a little famous for having stage fright, but who wouldn't with 500,000 people standing out there?
Yeah, the stage isn't ready, and there were a few elements that would have made it.
Too. But so I guess the promoter could not get Tim to go up. So they scrambled around. There's Richie Havens, and he just went up there, and they threw together an acoustic guitar and a percussionist. I think he had, what did he have? Maybe a bass player with him. I can't remember, but no, I think it was just guitar and percussion. If I'm not mistaken.
A few people kind of joined in as he went. He was doing that kind of ad-lib freedom song kind of thing, I believe.
Yeah, and I heard that, and he did a long set. I heard, and that's why he did some of those famous songs. He's just pulling stuff out of his hat, like Here Comes the Sun and whatnot, because the promoter's going, keep playing. We got to get the next band going. So that must have been something. But it's funny because, incidentally, I had a wonderful conversation with John Sebastian, who played on my release, which we'll talk about in a minute.
Yeah.
Because John worked with Tim a lot back in the day and did 2 albums with him and whatnot, and knew him back in Greenwich Village. And it's funny because, that famous picture of John Sebastian in front of 500,000 people with that tie-dye shirt,
mm-hmm.
John was not even booked at Woodstock. But apparently, I guess it's Michael Lang, the producer, just said, asked him if he came out because he was just basically visiting his friends out there, right? And this I got from John himself. He told me this story, but Michael Lang asked him to go on, and then he didn't have a guitar. So the guitar he's playing, it was Tim's guitar that day. Tim loaned him his guitar to do that set. It's a little inside story on Woodstock there.
For those of you who don't know who John Sebastian is, probably most famous for Love and Spoonful, but he's played with everyone.
Absolutely.
I believe Roadhouse Blues by the Doors, I believe he plays harmonica on that with the Doors.
He worked with a lot of different people as a harp player, and did some great work with Tim on his early albums, playing, and when Tim was doing a lot of blues. And they had the same manager back in the day, so that's how they knew each other.
Oh, cool.
In fact, John told me, he goes, they lived like in the same apartment building and back in Greenwich Village, and apparently he gets a knock on the door like at 11 o'clock one night, and Tim, in his own inimitable fashion, goes, "Hey, you, John Sebastian, John, you're playing on my album tomorrow."
Okay.
Okay. And Tim was a very kind of straightforward and charismatic guy, and I guess John said, "Well, okay." So they made Tim's, I think it was his first recording that actually ended up coming out after 2 albums. Another story on that, but yeah, it was I think it was called "This Is Tim Hardin." He did a lot of traditional blues stuff on it. It was great.
That's a good story. Yeah, you're playing on it. Okay, what am I playing? Well,
yeah,
we'll deal with that later.
It was all. He did some great work, blues harp stuff on that album. And on that note, I know we're talking a lot about and we played a couple cuts from my my current songwriting project, but I'm also will soon release a tribute to Tim Hardin with a number of his songs, and I did a couple of the tunes that John played originally on, a couple old blues tunes, and I got him to play harp on these cuts as well. So was honored to get John Sebastian to play on this upcoming release of Tim Hardin music.
That's good. I'm looking forward to it.
Also, another original guy that played with Tim, who played with him at Carnegie Hall, was a fabulous jazz vibes player, Mike Maneri. And Tim had a very famous tune for Tim Hardin fans. It wasn't so famous in the general public. A tune called "Misty Roses," which Tim felt was his best lyric. And Mike played on that at Carnegie Hall with him, and did some beautiful work. So I got Mike to record on my version of "Misty Roses" as well. I think it should be mentioned that I feel like Tim is a sort of a forgotten genius, and I've kind of taken it upon myself to get his music out there again with some of these new productions. I'm just doing my own thing with him.
And probably nobody better to do it than you.
Yeah. It's personal. I knew him. He inspired me, and they're beautiful tunes. So I hope that folks will check it out. It should be out in a couple of months, and keep an eye open for it. Maybe we'll rekindle some interest in Tim. Ironically, there was a guy, Ben Edmonds, who was a journalist for a number of magazines, including Cream and Rolling Stone and whatnot. Well-known rock journalist. He was writing Tim's biography, and we were hoping to release these 2 projects together. Sadly, he died a couple of years ago. Suddenly had pancreatic cancer and died, so he never finished the manuscript, but it's somewhere. It was almost done, and we were hoping to do that together, but he was very dedicated to Tim and was a big fan and had written a couple of his liner notes on a couple of his albums. Anyway, he had a fascinating story. There's also a movie script written. There's been talk about that getting released, but, it's always 4 ifs and a maybe in Hollywood.
Heard that one somewhere. I don't know. So your upcoming CD is Another Life, Fate Cuts Like a Knife, and the Tim Hardin one is called Last Troubadour?
Yeah, it's called The Last Troubadour because I feel like Tim was kind of the last real troubadour. He just sang from his heart, and that's what he did. And I think, as we were talking about technology in the modern world, and I think that's almost a lost art form because, I don't know, it just seems like it's more about, fireworks displays than it is just about a simple tune. And I harken back to days when I watched Tim at the Troubadour, and, that was enough.
Yeah, back to the basics, one person, the fundamentals.
One person, singing a good tune and expressing it well. And that's what I hope people will garner from my release. And it's truly from the heart.
Here's Richard Hastings performing Another Life, the title cut to his new CD, Another Life, Fate Cuts Like a Knife.
Maybe should have stayed with my high school sweetheart. Maybe should have raised 4 kids in Monterey. Maybe should have never left the meadows of Montana. Maybe I'd be singing sweet bluegrass today. Ooh, ooh, oh, ooh. Maybe should have raised some hell in New York City. Maybe should have stayed on that job down in L.A. Maybe should have never left the workday nitty-gritty. Problem is, well, I'd be someone else today. 'Cause that's another song, that's another plan, another book, another man, that's another life. And fate cuts like a knife. Fate cuts like a knife. Probably should have never left that table in Las Vegas. Probably should have never left that lady in Spain. Pobrecita, me hace falta. But God knows I would have never been the same. Oh. It's anybody's guess. Take a right or take a left. Head down the highway right at the light, go straight ahead. It's anybody's guess if I could have changed tomorrow. Problem is, I'd be someone else instead. 'Cause that's another song, that's another plan, that's another book, another man, that's another life. Fate cuts like a knife. If you really stop and think about it, if you really want to know, there ain't no doubt about it, it's way beyond our control. 'Cause it's another song, it's another plan, another book, another man, it's another scene, another dream, another game that ain't the same. It's another fight, ain't no glory living somebody else's story. It's another life, and fate cuts like a knife. Fate cuts like a knife. You know that's how she rolls. Mm-hmm. Fate cuts like a knife. Fate cuts like a knife.
tonight. Make everything now, baby. Better in every way. Better in every way.
You've been listening to the Better Each Day podcast radio show with Bruce Hilliard. We'll be back with a new horizon, but until then, honor the future. It comes with a lifetime guarantee.
And we're all just trying to make the next day a bit better.